Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I'm Tahir Dhindsa and you're watching SDTV. We all know that industrial development took place so rapidly within a century and two, and we see the current world, which is no match with the past if you go 200 years, all because of the fossil fuel, coal also. But now, because of the climate change, which we see it become drastic and very unkind to the humanity. We have recently seen, an episode in Dubai, had an episode in Pakistan when the whole of the Sindh province was drowned in the flood for many months. The water is still there. So phasing out coal is policy and it's a fait accompli as well. We have today, and obviously it's not easy because new options are there, how to adopt that, financing and everything. So every time we think on that for research and other things, we need an expert who is keenly working on the subject to guide us and guide the audience and guide other policymakers to assist their work in a better way to ensure the better compliance to the policy. We have today with us Dr. Yixian Sun. He's a senior lecturer, associate professor in the international development at the University of Bath, England. And his PhD master's degree in international relations, political science from the Graduate of International Development Studies in Geneva and postdoctorate fellow at the Yale University. Doctor, very warm welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure to join the SDPI podcast.
All right. So I would just in the beginning, President Xi has announced that China is looking forward to phase out coal. The coal project, I'm saying coal, so affected by the weather, to phase out coal. And obviously it's not easy. Also, the dependence on electricity is also increasing elsewhere. So how does this political ambition is going to affect BRI?
All right, that's an important question. But before I answer that, I just want to clarify the scope of China's pledge. So basically, President Xi made this pledge in 2021 at the UN General Assembly, September 2021. I think the term was to stop supporting new coal projects abroad. So basically, it's really about China's overseas investment or financing for coal-fired power plants. So we know that if we look at the record, China has financed a lot of coal-fired power plants abroad, especially since the beginning of the Belt and Road Initiative in 2013. But then this was a quite important shift because for a very long time, China is very well known for its foreign policy principle of non-intervention, which means they don't really have additional requirements when engaging with other countries. So basically, when we interpret this or translate this principle into practice in overseas engagement or financing or investment, which means they only comply with host country regulations without asking additional conditions. But this is a kind of shift from that, meaning that China has setting a standard saying that we don't want to finance coal even if host countries want it. So that's why I think it's an important shift. But actually, it aligns also with a kind of gradual movement or shift of the Belt and Road Initiative starting around 2017, which is the so-called Green Belt and Road Initiative. I've done also research in that to show how this has happened. We can see a very strong ambition or aspiration of China, of the Chinese leadership, to really brand Belt and Road Initiative as a way or a new mechanism to promote green development for developing countries and trying to show China's important role, but also a very responsible role in the global community. This has been followed not only by some very high-level guidance, but also some specific efforts, policy guidelines, and also in new directions of, for example, investment by Chinese businesses, financial institutions. So this is kind of a gradual shift in that sense that China trying to move away from so-called dirty investment or black investment to more like green investment. So since the pledge, we have seen there's actually a very clear record that China trying to stop financing any new coal-fired power plants abroad. Obviously, there are always some discussions or debate about how they define new and also what's the scope of this pledge. But I think we should not question the pledge or the ambition of Chinese leadership trying to turn into a new directions for Chinese overseas energy investment. I think I'll stop here.
Yeah, obviously, it's not easy. It doesn't depend. It doesn't depend only on the demand side, but there's a whole supply side chain, which is often very difficult to replace. And the financing, most of the financing is investment nowadays. What is the financial mechanism, especially through institutions over new? Has China thought over it, or are you very confident that this financial arrangement as an input to the supply chain is available?
Yeah, that's even like more difficult questions. I think to understand the financing model, then you have to understand how complex it is, especially for the overseas financing of China. Obviously, I think we know that the main difference here is China relies a lot on public financing for its overseas investment, especially the financing through policy banks, for example, China Development Bank and Export and Import Bank of
Exim
China.
Bank.
Yeah, so they play an important role. That means because they are public institutions, government agency. So once the Chinese government had made that decision, they follow very closely. But in the meantime, we also know it's not just based on the decision made by these financial institutions. There are also, for example, coal industry having a very strong interest in exporting technologies and equipment overseas, and they may also have a strong vested interest in continue the like investment in coal for Chinese from China in other developing countries, but because this very kind of top-down approach, policy-making approach, that what we have seen is the power of that interest group, those who really want to push for coal, has been decreased quite like dramatically over the last few years. Obviously, it doesn't mean that this interest group or these actors are no longer there. But I think what we can see is if Chinese government is really trying to promote different types of investment, meaning, for example, renewable energy investment or clean energy investment, then how they are going to support these companies or these industries to help them to invest overseas. I think that's something a lot of observers are actually looking for, and hopefully we will see more concrete policy measures. But we have seen already some kind of signs. For example, China has signed some agreements or MOUs with some developing countries through public financial institutions or development finance institutions, and in collaboration with some renewable energy companies trying to support their overseas activities. Yeah, to my knowledge, I think we need to see more. Maybe we haven't seen a lot in the case of Pakistan, but that's something I think we hope with support of institutions like SDPI and many other institutions in Pakistan, China, we can try to have more collaborative agreement to support green investment.
Right. So that was the future investment. What about phasing out coal projects?
Yeah, that's I think another slightly a different topic. So I would say retiring existing plants is a quite different but also difficult issues, are very much more complex because you have to think about the ownership structure of the plants, and then you involve different stakeholders as well. Obviously, we know coal-fired power plants cause a lot of harms to the environment and local communities. So we want them to be retired early. But from like the economic question, I think it's much more complex than just increasing investment in renewables. So far, from the Chinese government side, we haven't seen a very clear signal that suggests that the government is very willing to finance early retirement.
Right.
But what we have seen is the financial institutions in China. There have been some discussions, and because I've been involved in some kind of capacity building activities or training activities with some financial institutions. They talk about transition finance. We talk about just the transition as a principle, how to implement this principle into practice, into their financial activities, financing activities. And so there is kind of an important trend or new trend for financial institutions to recognize what's happening internationally. But obviously, some existing models led by Western countries or developed countries is still quite different from maybe something that Chinese government wants. For example, the Just Energy Transition Partnership led by developed countries. I think we don't see like there is a clear sense that Chinese government want to develop something similar, but obviously I would say this ultimately depends on the interest of host countries. So what kind of financial agreements that host countries would like to ask China and trying to negotiate with China. There are also a lot of difficult discussions. To my knowledge, for example, even in the case of Pakistan, not everyone is agreed about what's the pathways to retiring existing power plants. So I think, we have to see how we can bring different actors on the negotiation table and then try to find some arrangement.
Right. Obviously, these are big questions. One last question before putting an end to the program. How do you see CPAC projects? Because CPAC Phase 1 had two very important components. One was roads and bridges and communication highways. And the second was energy plants, and some of them were coal projects and all that. And some of them are not performing to its whole capacity because demand is very low somewhere. So how do you see that?
Yeah, so I always think CPAC is a good model for South-South cooperation. So I think it has a huge potential in terms of improving the development or accelerating development of host countries, and then also leveraging different resources to support the development of Pakistan, but also not only for elites, but also for people. But obviously, when we talk about or when we think about the implementations, I think we realize there are a lot of issues. And then sometimes even like project with very good intentions, trying to design in a very like smart way, but maybe not end up with the outcome that they want. I think that the challenge here, if we think about the energy project, is the government, the Pakistan government has very strong ambitions to increase, for example, energy access, energy security, and also to transition towards a more clean energy system. But obviously, if we look at the indicators, there are still a lot of gaps there. So we think about the Sustainable Development Goal 7, I think there's still a long way for the Pakistan to achieve the goals and these targets. But what's the role of the CPAC? I think there is a potential there, and we have seen some clean energy project in CPAC. Obviously, not all of them end up with the outcome that we want, but I think there are still a lot of gaps that CPAC projects can bring, and this is why we have to identify what are the needs of different communities, different localities, and then how you can link to those who can provide the type of technologies they want or like the good financial arrangements, and then we can really try to work to achieve the goals that people and also the government wants. So I believe if we can have more kind of deliberation and trying to get a more inclusive decision-making processes and to get more people involved in the decision-making, then we can try to develop some good projects and then also implement that well in order to achieve the goals that the government wants.
Doctor, thank you very much for sparing valuable time to speak to you. In fact, it was very insightful, and I think we don't need to summarize, but the bottom line is that China do not want to impose its decision on its friend, but obviously there's a policy that they don't want to invest in coal projects to be climate friendly and make BRI and CPAC green, but a lot depends on the host countries and how they want to negotiate the future, especially for their existing projects. Thank you very much. And with this, we come to the end of the program. Goodbye.